Hi, I'm Faith McInerney, and today we're going to talk about the Sun Moon Midpoint. There are different interpretations for the Sun Moon Midpoint. One very well-respected astrologer used to call it the karmic ascendant, and he used it for health information. But for our purposes today, we're going to talk about the Sun Moon Midpoint symbolizing a couple. If there's a planet on the midpoint, that planet describes details such as the profession of the partner, or the circumstances showing how you met, or the condition of the relationship. And this is also true in the solar return and the lunar return. I urge that you use this in your solar returns and lunar returns. You will get the condition of the partnership. In many respects, the Sun Moon Midpoint operates like Venus and Venus aspects, or like seventh house planets or seventh house aspects. Now, the Sun Moon Midpoint is very likely to describe a relationship that you're part of, but not always. Particularly in a solar or lunar return, it can describe a couple that you're close to, such as a couple with whom you work, or if there's a couple who happens to live in your house. In a child's life, planets contacting the Sun Moon Midpoint will often reflect the events in the lives of their parents. Now, a word about midpoints. A midpoint picture is expressed with a slash and an equal sign. So, for example, Mercury on the Sun Moon Midpoint would be expressed as Mercury equals Sun/Moon. Every software program calculates midpoints. In this presentation, you'll see the techniques that I find to be the most efficient, and they include the dial and the midpoint sort. I use them because they allow you to see the greatest incidence of midpoint pictures. Astrology is a two-part process. It's understanding the delineation, and it's identifying the aspect or midpoint picture whenever it occurs. Whatever technique you use, the delineations are going to be identical. So first, we're going to talk about Mercury on the Sun Moon Midpoint. It describes a partner in a Mercury profession, or meeting in a Mercury environment, which would be education or publication or vehicles, or through a sibling, aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews. So here's an example of Mercury on the Sun Moon Midpoint. He had other things going on, but we're going to deal with Mercury for the moment. Emmanuel Macron married his teacher. He has natal Sun equals Moon equals Mercury equals Uranus, more about that later, equals the Aries point. Now, I want to make a point, actually, before we go any further. The most dynamic pictures are when the midpoints are also in exact aspect. And that's what's happening here. He doesn't only have Mercury on the Sun Moon Midpoint, he has Sun equals Moon equals Mercury equals Uranus, and that makes it a much more dynamic aspect. So you'll notice that they all equal this Aries glyph, and that means they are on what's called the Aries point, and that emphasizes a picture. Whenever a planet or a midpoint picture falls on the Aries point, it's also known as the AP, but I call it the Aries point. Whenever a planet or a picture falls on the Aries point, it's as important as an angular planet. It emphasizes the midpoint picture. So I like this dial because it makes all of the planets in hard aspect look like a conjunction. And it's efficient. Now, here is the same aspect on a sort. We're going to have a little, with learning about Macron's chart and how he married his teacher, we're going to have a little tutorial on the pictures that you're going to see in the next few slides. For example, the techniques that you'll see. This is the sort. It's the same aspect. Sun equals Moon equals Uranus equals Mercury we don't see the Aries point here, but you'll take my word for it. Sun equals moon equals Uranus equals Mercury. And you see they're all lined up. And the advantage of a sort is that you see the precise orb. You see that the difference between the sun and Mercury is only 26 minutes. This whole picture is only 26-minute orb. So the advantage of this, other than what we've just looked at, is that you can identify when progressions form an exact aspect. And I really don't know of any other technique that in astrology that will let you do that in this simple kind of way. Now, just to be complete, here's the same chart on a 90-degree dial. And if this does not sell you on a dial, I don't know what will. Because we see here that the sun equals moon equals Mercury equals Uranus. It looks like an opposition. The fact that it's with Aries makes it extra emphasized. And it's just a beautiful example of the 90-degree dial showing aspects. And here's his natal chart. And I mean, I've been studying astrology probably, close to as long as anybody is on the planet. And I certainly could not find that he married a Mercury person in his traditional chart. But there is his traditional chart. So here are the other delineations for Mercury equals Sun Moon. As you know, Mercury has to do with vehicles. It's the winged messenger. And so, for example, one woman with Mercury equals Sun Moon married a car dealer. And another man with Mercury equals Sun Moon had a trucking company with his wife. And insofar as publications, a woman married an heir to a printing fortune. He was not a printer himself. It was the family business. In terms of siblings, when this woman divorced, in other words, she had married the heir to a printing fortune, she divorced, and then she married her ex-husband's cousin. So the sibling thing can be very convoluted, actually. We're going to talk about, the convolutions of the siblings in a minute, but that's an example of a convoluted situation, her ex-husband's cousin. Ferdinand Marcos was introduced to Imelda by her uncle, and there was a ruler who was set to marry a woman, and then he met her sister, and that's who he married. So when it comes to siblings, there are many permutations, and some of them are convoluted. Here's one. So Joseph Haydn married his girlfriend's sister. Had a girlfriend, she had a sister, he married her. James Sterling, I think he's an author, married his friend's cousin. Here's a prince whose grandmother arranged for him to marry the niece of Napoleon. Here's somebody who married the sister of a colleague. Here's an actress who met her boyfriend when she was working on a movie about brothers and sisters. And here's an author who had a romance with his cousin. It was in his solar return, Mercury equals Sun Moon. And Albert Einstein had the same picture in a lunar return when he married his cousin. Again, I urge you to use solar and lunar returns. You'll see the incidence of the pictures more frequently. Here are some progressed illustrations. When Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis met her first husband, they were introduced by a journalist. She had progressed Mercury 2 minutes from the Sun Moon Midpoint, and her natal Mercury really was not close enough in orb, but her progressed Mercury came right up to it. Now, here's an example of how you'd never really be able to get the orb without a calculator. But if you use a sort, you see the orb exactly for the progression. Very efficient. Same thing here. When this is, I believe, Queen Victoria, and when she first connected with her cousin romantically, who she eventually married, she had progressed Mercury approaching the Sun Moon Midpoint. It hit on, and they met and married within a relative proximate time. And so when she married, it had already separated from the Sun Moon midpoint. So it started off lower than 1754. They were courting while it hit 1754, and they married when it was 14 minutes past the midpoint. Now, this is a rare occasion. We're looking at this same chart here, when you can actually spot the midpoint with a traditional chart and, maybe a calculator. So we see the Mercury was so close to conjunction. She had a Sun-Moon conjunction. That's why I say it's rare. How many people have this kind of close, easy to read aspect of the Sun and Moon on a traditional chart? And so we can actually even eyeball this if we were looking at a bi-wheel on a traditional chart. But it's rare. I mean, this kind of thing does not grow on trees. So Venus equals Sun Moon is a partner who's pleasant and charming. Here is an example of an emperor who had Sun Moon equals Venus, and there's his wife. They called her the smiling empress. She embodies Venus equals Sun Moon. It can also mean a beautiful partner, or a partner who dresses really well, or who decorates, makes the environment really beautiful. Beauty is a factor for the partner. So here's an illustration with Ava Gardner's. Ava Gardner is the beautiful partner. She's the beautiful woman. And here are the charts of two guys who married her. Their solar returns, which occurred 7 years apart. She married frequently. And this has nothing to do with her chart. These are the solar returns of the men who married her. And when they connected with her, as you can see, they had nice, tight aspects of Venus on the Sun Moon midpoint. Now, this is not the only way that this kind of events show up. Orson Welles also had relationships with beautiful women, and he connected with them with Sun equals Venus equals Aries in his solar returns. The other, one of the other delineations for Venus equals Sun Moon is a partner who's social, parties, or who's artistic. And here's an example using Queen Elizabeth I. She was into a guy named Robert Dudley. They never married, but they had a very long friendship and very close friendship. I believe she had a bedroom in the castle that was his. So anyway, he was described as notoriously handsome, patron of the arts. That's Venus right there. He had 20 portraits of himself commissioned, and he was a party animal. And the quote about him was he produced grand festivities and performances. Now, he really wanted to marry Elizabeth. And in a last-ditch effort to marry her, he threw a party that lasted 3 weeks. But she was solid. She didn't want to marry him. And so she had natal Venus equals Sun Moon. That describes him. And here is the lunar return for the party. She had Venus equals Sun Moon, the same picture as she had in her solar return. This is the lunar return, but she had Saturn Venus. So she had Saturn Venus, and she had Saturn on the Sun Moon midpoint. So that's sort of a double Saturn Venus. Saturn Venus is almost, let's say it's identical to Saturn at the Sun Moon midpoint. And here is a painting of the party, grand festivity. Now, this is interesting. When her progressed Venus was on her Sun Moon midpoint, he married someone else. Now, I can't say it's uncommon. It is more common that it will describe, particularly if you are in a relationship, that it will describe someone with whom you're involved. But it is also really common to be describing a relationship event that you are really close to. This is not, a distant cousin or somebody you haven't seen in 25 years. You have a front row seat with this relationship, And it can describe that relationship, not yours, theirs. So Mars and the Sun Moon partners, they are active. They participate in their mate's activity. One description was they are an active assistant. Mars equals Sun Moon is also a courageous and energetic. That's intuitive about Mars, and also intuitive, noisy, boisterous, impulsive, rash. These are the impulsive and rash. These are general Mars delineations. And it also describes a turbulent relationship where where the partner can be argumentative or harsh or worse. The native's own Mars-like behavior may result in a turbulent relationship. In other words, let's say it's mine. I may bring it into the relationship, and so it describes my relationship rather than just describing my partner. It describes my relationship. So here's how it's expressed by writers. By all of these writers had Mars equals Sun Moon. Fortune is a woman, and it's necessary in order to keep her down, to beat her and to struggle with her. That's Machiavelli. Another author, without an element of initial rape, there is no delight. This was written by Lord Byron when he had progressed Mars equal the Sun Moon midpoint. My love for that girl were so violent. And this is a song by The Doors. It was Robbie Krieger, I think. And the song said, I think the song is called Don't You Love Her? And the line is, don't you love her? She's walking out the door like she's done 1,000 times before. And what he said about it was every time we had an argument, she'd get pissed off and go out the door. She'd slam the door so loud the house would shake. And that is Mars equals Sun Moon. Now, Queen Victoria, we've actually looked at her a minute ago when we looked at Mercury, which she did not actually have at the natal midpoint. It really, really came to her Sun Moon midpoint by progression. But what she did have at the Sun Moon midpoint was Mars. And she was a Mars person. She had, you could actually say she had Mars equals Sun and Mars equals Moon. And she, what was said about the relationship, there were terrible rows. Albert was terrified by her temper. She'd storm around the palace, and he was reduced to putting notes under her door. And here's an example of a note that he wrote. You have again lost your self-control, quite unnecessarily. I did not begin the conversation, but you followed me about and continued it from room to room. And that is turbulent. That's a Mars relationship. And Albert used to lock himself in his room. Actually, this was when she wanted sex. She was a Venus-Mars person. And so when he locked himself in his room, she would bang on the door, open the door, I'm the queen. It's a Mars person with power. So here's the husband of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. He had the natal Mars equals Sun Moon, 6 minutes from, no, one more time. He had Mars equals Sun Moon, period. What some quotes about him, it was speculated that he actually might have killed Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And the question is, why do his poems so often feature husbands who kill or resent their wives? So before, during, and after his marriage to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, his work is populated by husbands who kill or resent their wives. Here's a quote. All her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times around her little throat. Around, I didn't say that quite right, and I strangled her. So that was a poem that he wrote. And so you see, he had Mars equals Sun Moon. When the midpoint was 6 minutes from exact, he initiated the meeting, by the way. He wrote her a letter and initiated the meeting, and the word she used for him was impetuous. She had a diary, and that's what she said about him. The relationship led to contention with her father. He went on to disown her. And despite their very romantic legacy, she wrote the poems, Sonnets to a Portuguese, and this is probably the most famous line she wrote, and probably one of the most famous lines in poetry, period. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Despite that, they quarreled frequently, everything from their son's hair to politics. He would frequently lose the arguments. Mars, he would lose the arguments. I should have a picture of the son's hair. It's kind of down to his waist. So she wanted long curls and she got her way. And some historians speculate that he actually hastened her death. She died young. She had a lifelong illness. She was already sick. So they say that he might have hastened her death, but it might have been like a mercy killing. But there are instances of violence. Some of them are a little, weird, like Claudia Schiffer was sawed in half by her fiance's magic act. And two women whose husbands were shot, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and Ethel Kennedy, had Mars equals Sun Moon. But it was just once in the charts of the killers who killed their mates. I don't quite understand that, whether it was on their Sun Moon midpoint or not. You'll forgive me. Mary, Queen of Scots, married a man with a unpleasant, violent streak. She had the natal picture, and it reappeared in their solar return when they married. And in another solar return, Marcel Proust fought a duel over his sexuality, Mars equals Sun Moon. Now, in a minute, we're going to be looking at Proust with another solar return that he had. But you could maybe this isn't as good as the second example, which we're going to see in a couple of minutes. But something that comes up a lot is whether the Sun Moon midpoint can describe a gay relationship, because either, in a gay relationship, really, literally, it's sun, sun, or moon, moon. But in fact, we're going to see in a minute much more clearly, and this to some extent, that even in a gay relationship, that the Sun Moon midpoint will describe the coupleness of them. Now, there is evidence for partners associated with the military, but it's spotty, and it may be because they're not listed in the database. And some of the references were elliptical, but, they happened. So, for example, Bill Gates, who has Mars equals Sun Moon, his wife was on the drill team. And here's an author whose wife wrote about, he wrote about a daughter, his wife wrote about the daughter of the Confederacy. And here's an incident of a spouse of a ruler, primarily, who became involved with wars for the reason of family loyalty. And when that happened, Mars equals Sun Moon in her husband's chart. In other words, it described his wife's activity. Now, this is a real head scratcher. When Lord Byron died, he was involved in a foreign war, in an Italian war. It showed up in his friend's chart. Mary Shelley was a friend of his. She wrote Frankenstein. She was a friend of his. And in her chart, she had progressed Mars equals Sun Moon. She had the natal picture, and progressed Mars triggered off the natal picture. And it described her friend dying. Now, he was a best friend to Mary and her husband, Percy. Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley were married. Percy Shelley had died years before. So their best friend died in a war. Now, there's no record of anything between Mary and Byron. And they knew each other for years, and they were so notorious. Byron was so notorious, it would be chronicled if there was something going on, but there wasn't. So Byron's death is symbolized as a sun-moon event in Mary's chart, as if her marriage was a reference point for describing Byron, that he was a feature of her marriage. I'm guessing. It's a mystery. It's a head scratcher. Usually they're not that elliptical, but this one was. In terms of Mars and athletes, the partners of two acrobats, Princess Stephanie married an acrobat, and Burt Lancaster was an acrobat. I think he might have married another acrobat. And here's somebody who this is an example of when people marry enthusiasts for a sport like tennis or golf. Ivana Trump, for example, had the natal picture. She married a golf enthusiast. There were two boxers in the database, and neither of their, I should say, two boxers' wives in the database, and neither of them had the natal picture. So, in terms of probability for Mars on the Sun Moon midpoint, you're going to go back to the first page of delineations and go for the active assistant or the tempestuous relationship or the boisterous partner, much more likely than the war or the sports. Jupiter equals Sun Moon is comparable to Venus Jupiter or a seventh house Jupiter. I'm very big on Jupiter having to do with distance. It's not that it doesn't have to do with luck, but it very commonly, particularly in a midpoint picture, has to do with people who are far away or things that happen on a trip, or you are traveling or they're traveling. So yeah, a foreign partner, or a partner who's born in a foreign country, a partner who travels, a partner who's in the travel industry, a partner with whom you travel, or if you just marry in a foreign country. Now, it's a very common manifestation when it's in the solar or lunar return. But this can show up other ways. As I mentioned, Venus-Jupiter aspects, or TNP Apollon equals Sun Moon, all symbolize the same thing. So here are people with natal Jupiter equals Sun Moon. People who married foreigners, this was an American marrying an English person, an American marrying a Lebanese person, a French person marrying an Italian, an English person marrying an American. And these are people who married flight attendants. Wes Craven and Benjamin Netanyahu, Wes Craven married a flight attendant, and Netanyahu met his wife on a trip, and she was the flight attendant. They may have ties to foreign countries without necessarily being born there or living there. So, for example, here's a guy whose wife is Iranian American. She was born in America, but her father, even currently, has a TV show in Iran, and her mother had a show in Iran. In other words, her family has a big presence in Iran. Now, this is interesting because the event happened after the person died. So Jack London had the natal picture, and after he died, his widow wanted to make sure that his writings were published worldwide, and her most significant activity to publicize his works were her trips abroad after he died. Is that common? It's not. But just to say, it happens. And he also had a long romance with a Russian. Now, these people are Americans. They married Americans, but they married in a foreign country. Jennifer Aniston, Brad Pitt, and Marilyn Manson. These are events that happened on various progressions or whatever we're going to find here, maybe some transits. So this guy Richard Lionheart was betrothed to a French princess when he had the progression 5 minutes orb. Here's somebody who her son, they were French, and her French son married a Polish princess, and this was the mother. Her son married the Polish princess, with a progressed picture of Jupiter equals Sun Moon, precisely. Another illustration of the Sun Moon event being a person you're very close to, but a relationship you're not part of. When children have a planetary contact to their Sun Moon midpoint, very likely to be an event with their parents, particularly young children. So, for example, when Prince George had the aspect, 2 minutes orb, he was little baby Prince George. He toured Canada with his parents. And here's an example of somebody who was a baby when his father left the family to go to Cuba. I think we're going to see more of this events in the lives of children. If you have children and they are young children, they will. It's interesting to look at their charts because they will reflect the relationship that you're in. However, a transit of Jupiter to Sun Moon is less likely to involve travel or foreigners. You know, mostly they go pretty quickly, those transits. So a transiting station is likely to have more significance. And here we're not necessarily talking about Jupiter and luck, kind of, not necessarily. We're talking about Jupiter in terms of the expansive possibilities. In other words, it expands the possibilities for an event. And so, for example, when Mark Zuckerberg met his wife, this is the aspect. Jupiter was 14 minutes from the Sun Moon Midpoint. She was born here. I guess her parents were immigrants. Now that I think of it, really, you know, this actually could qualify for the long distance part of Jupiter Sun Moon. Incidentally, it was like a few days. This was not even a station, and he met an important relationship. Was it the only thing going on? I really doubt it. I don't think a transit, not a station of Jupiter equals Sun Moon, would result in a marriage. What I have seen, however, are Jupiter stations. People marry on a Jupiter station to the Sun Moon Midpoint. And Britney Spears, this was a short marriage. She married for, Britney Spears is on the right. Yes. So she married for 55 hours. Here's transiting Jupiter on her Sun Moon Midpoint. This is another one. They might have gone to Vegas. So she actually also might have had that out of town quality. So a transit of Jupiter equals Sun Moon can be pleasant, but it's usually insignificant unless a station. And sometimes it's an ordinary, if it's not a station, it's an ordinary contact that may mark an attraction or a bounce in an ongoing relationship, or, to be honest with you, somebody flirting with you at the supermarket. That inconsequential. So here is an example of Jupiter and luck, where the couple won the lottery. And it happened when progressed Jupiter was 3 minutes from the Sun Moon Midpoint. On these sorts, the progressed planet or the transiting planet, whatever, will show up as B, and the actual midpoint picture will show up with no letter connected with it. But even here, you know, they won millions of dollars. So it's entirely possible that at the very time that they won that money, that they traveled. The Nova chart wheel's delineation of Jupiter equals Sun Moon is day of good luck. I cannot speak to that. I'm just telling you the Nova chart wheel's delineation of it. Now, here's a guy who this is an illustration of the day of good luck. He survived an assassination attempt when progressed Jupiter was 1 minute orb from the Sun Moon Midpoint. When it was separating, he got engaged to a foreigner. And here are some examples where I don't know. Barack Obama, I don't know. I don't know why these people have Jupiter at the Sun Moon Midpoint. They do. The manifestation of it eludes me. But just to say that astrology is messy, and there are going to be some instances that cannot be explained. Saturn on the Sun Moon Midpoint is comparable to Venus Saturn or seventh house Saturn. It has to do with relationship. I mean, you can intuit this. It has to do with relationship challenges or separation. Now, the separation, and this is true of Venus Saturn also. And by the way, the delineation, oh no, we're not going to be doing delineations of Venus Saturn. Too bad. Let me just say a quickie about this. First of all, when you have a Saturn to the Sun Moon Midpoint, or a transit of Saturn to Venus, not so much a seventh house Saturn, but a transit of Saturn to Venus, the separation can be emotional or circumstantial, and it's not necessarily going to last. So for example, if this is happening to you where Saturn is hitting your Venus or is on your Sun Moon midpoint, even if it's an emotional separation, like I hope I never see this person ever again, usually when the transit is over, the urgency of that feeling subsides. And I also want to make the point that the separation can be circumstantial when there is a bicoastal relationship or one works days and the other works nights. Those are also Saturn Venus and Saturn Sun Moon examples, not so much seventh house. In a natal chart, it can be the result of a personality trait. In other words, that emotional or circumstantial separation can be the result of a personality trait if the person is extremely independent. So James Dean and Jimi Hendrix never married and had lots of relationships, or no exclusive, no long-term marital kind of relationship. And both of them had Saturn on the Sun Moon midpoint. They didn't have the personality for it. They were both kind of, a wild child in their own ways. Now, some people with Saturn equals Sun Moon had very bad first marriages and then happy subsequent marriage or marriages. And in some instances, this is not common, but it does happen. It's the marriage of older people. So Eva Braun married her husband 40 hours before she died, and Balzac married 5 months before he died. Now, Saturn equals Sun Moon by transit or progression. So we're going to look at some examples of Saturn equals Sun Moon by transit and progression and in the solar return. So it'll mark the time of the relationship challenge or separation, and the severity of it can range from temporary separation to divorce. Often it's circumstantial, like traveling separately, but it may be due to an emotional distance. And this is my point. In either event, it's often temporary. The feelings often pass when the transit is over. True of Saturn to Venus as well. Do not make a lifelong decision when transiting Saturn is on your Venus or transiting Saturn is on your Sun Moon midpoint. Wait till the transit is over and see if your feelings don't change. When a divorce does occur, Saturn equals Sun Moon is a common symbolic component by transit, progression, or solar return. Here is Robin Williams had no natal picture, but when progressed Saturn was exactly on the Sun Moon midpoint, he divorced. When Pamela Anderson filed for one of her divorces, transiting Saturn was on her Sun Moon midpoint. She didn't wait. When Prince Charles had the transit, he had a book about his bad marriage was released. And here's an example of Saturn equals Sun Moon and parents. So here is President Nixon's situation. He had the natal picture. He was young Richard Nixon when he was living with his parents, obviously. And his father's family and his mother's family did not like each other. When the progression was exact, when he was 9 years old, his father sold a house that his mother's father had sold him, and he lost money. And Nixon's father accused Nixon's father-in-law of swindling him. I don't think that's correct. Nixon's father accused Nixon's mother's father. It wasn't Nixon's father-in-law. It was his mother's father. Forgive me. So when progressed Saturn was exact, in 1942, he went to war. That's a very normal circumstantial separation. And when he was accused of beating his wife, Saturn equals Sun Moon appeared in his solar return. I have no idea whether he did or not. It was an accusation. When Princess Mako, this was in the news recently, was cut off from family activities as a result of marrying a commoner, she had a major aspect, tight orb, and this was Saturn equals Sun Moon in the natal chart. And you also see that with when the parents disapprove of the marriage partner, you also see this with Saturn Juno. I'm not quite sure why this is so common with parents disapproving of the marriage, but it is another picture for that. And here's another example of a woman who married late. She had a very happy marriage. I remember her saying, "He's so fun." And then she became fatally ill. They were married for a number of years. She married late. They had a happy marriage. It was really lasting. And then she got really sick. And it freaked her husband out so much that she actually left him while she was dying. And she went to her parents' house to die. And that is, example from my files. She was just a wonderful woman, and Saturn equals Sun Moon. She also had Venus conjunct the South Node in Pisces. Now, Uranus equals Sun Moon is comparable to Venus Uranus or seventh house Uranus. Very commonly, particularly in the 21st century, there's a technical component. The partner is in a tech job, or you connect through an app, or the relationship is conducted with texts, or et cetera, like that. However, even in the 21st century, Uranus equals Sun Moon can have to do with flouting conventions and having values that are not in the mainstream. And sometimes it's unusual events that mark the meeting, or some surprise destabilizes or derails the relationship. Uranus. These marriages stay together despite flouting tradition. This is Martin Luther. He started a whole religion. And one of the issues was he broke with the Catholic Church tradition and initiated clerical marriage. So he had Uranus equals Sun Moon. He married a reformer. They had an unusual meeting. He helped her flee in a herring cart, hid her in a herring cart, and that was their unusual meeting. They had a role reversal relationship. Her dominance was inconsistent with his theory of gender relationships, but he tolerated her rule with good cheer. Role relationship was also the case here. It's particularly noticeable in previous centuries where, roles were more accepted. So this was a Queen of England, lifelong, very happily married, not an active husband. She wore the pants. And that apparently was not even typical for a queen in the 17th century. Sometimes with Uranus equals Sun Moon, it can be a really oddball couple, like a guy who became close with his friend's mother when she lost her husband, when she was widowed, and they moved in together and lived together until she died. Uranus equals Sun Moon, something odd. An impulsive marriage. A writer impulsively married an admirer after they had a short correspondence, and they stayed married. A surprise destabilizes or derails a relationship. So, for example, a guy that was contemplating marriage, but he had an accident and he decided to turn his life over to God. Here's a man who proposed marriage and he died a month before the wedding. That same year, he was in love with somebody else. Here is the event where Hitler's niece committed suicide. He was in love with his niece. But the word is I don't want to say legend, but what I've read about it, the report is that he was into some weird stuff sexually, and it made her feel really awful, and she killed herself. That was what was said to be the issue. Anyway, he had a natal Sun Moon Uranus picture, as you could see, and transiting Uranus was it transit. So he had Uranus to Uranus by transit and Uranus to Sun Moon by transit. And this is Hemingway, had the natal picture. He also had, and what do we see here? This is progression. So he had the natal Uranus 2 minutes from the Sun Moon midpoint, and progressed Uranus was 1 minute. I'm guessing he had a station of Uranus there. When it was almost exact by progression, he had a wife who was a journalist, and he refused to help her out with a press pass. This was during the war. and she was forced to travel on a plane full of explosives. So, period, that happened. And by the time she landed, he was hospitalized because he'd had an auto accident. She divorced him anyway, but he'd already proposed to his next wife, and they stayed together for a long time. So there we go with surprises and the relationship being derailed. Neptune equals Sun Moon is a partner in the medical profession or a partner who has health, drugs, or alcohol issues. Not the only thing it means. Give me a minute. We'll get to the other things. So Dr. Alzheimer's met his future wife when he was treating her husband. He had the natal, Neptune equals Sun Moon, a picture in his natal chart. And when they met, transiting Neptune was conjunct his natal Venus. I am very big on Neptune having to do with health, drugs, alcohol. So here's an example of Mata Hari. She was a courtesan and she was a spy. She was born on a Neptune station, actually. And so she had Neptune equals Sun Moon for a long time. Her husband was an alcoholic. They both infected their children with syphilis. She was recruited as a spy, and she was on board with it because it would allow her to visit the love of her life who'd gone blind during the war. So she had a bunch of Neptune equals Sun Moon manifestations in her life. Eva Braun had both Neptune and Saturn on the Sun Moon midpoint. If you remember, she's the one who married 40 hours before she died. And with the Saturn equals Sun Moon, and progressed Neptune equals Sun Moon when her boyfriend Hitler had surgery. When John Neptune had the transit, his wife, and this was just a transit, his wife's illness returned. And here's an example of somebody else's, we talked about this. Yeah, Queen Elizabeth I had this boyfriend, Robert Dudley. When she had the transit to the Sun Moon midpoint, her boyfriend's wife died. She died of a fall, but the circumstances were mysterious because his wife also had a malady. She was said to have breast cancer. So the circumstances about her death were muddied. But be that as it may, even though she died and he was free and she was free, it put a blight, I think was the word. It marred their chances of marriage. Let's face it, she was in a super public position. She had Capricorn rising. Her, work was her number one priority. Ruling the country was her number one priority, and marriage was really secondary. So any little thing that was wrong, she rejected the choice of marriage. So here's an example of Sun, Moon, and parents. This is a poet who had the progression when he was a child, and his father died, which in an accident, which was apparently, it was on horseback, but it was, DUI. And his mother remarried a man who she was deluded about, and period, she was deluded about her new husband. We don't know his relationship with alcohol. We just know that he did not, he disappointed her, expectations. And there are some instances, very rare, but I found them, I saw them, where there was a child's health event at the time of an exact progression. And because you have to guess that there was a health event that had an impact on the relationship. This was the incidence. When it happened, the illness of the child was really serious. We're not talking about a flu. So here we have the manifestation of Neptune and water. When people meet at the beach, when they marry on a boat, or the partner likes boats or works with the marine area. So Pamela Anderson has the natal picture. She got married on a boat twice, and she was infected by hepatitis with hepatitis by injecting with her husband. Here's a guy who met his wife at a lake. She worked in a biological lab. She sold samples of fish, rays, starfish, turtle, other marine forms. He was a Pisces, by the way. The artist Bonnard painted his wife bathing. This is not the only painting. I could have really, filled up the whole slide with paintings of Bonnard's wife bathing. Here is Proust again. When Proust's boyfriend drowned, he had transiting Neptune equals Sun Moon. He natally had Uranus on the Sun Moon midpoint, and transiting Neptune triggered off the picture. He also had it in his solar return by a minor aspect. That doesn't bother me. I read minor aspects all the time. And this is an example of a minor aspect really working. If you see Neptune equals Sun Moon in a solar return and the guy's boyfriend died, that's an illustration of a minor aspect working. But anyway, what's more important, or just as important, is this is evidence for the Sun Moon midpoint and same-sex relationships. T.S. Eliot noticed his wife when she was on a boat, and he had progressed Neptune approximately 2 minutes from the midpoint. He also had the natal midpoint picture, and eventually, once they were married for a while, she was hospitalized for the rest of her life. And this is another convoluted one where Brahms' solar return during Brahms. This is an example where Brahms' solar return included Neptune equals Sun Moon, and his friend attempted suicide by drowning. Now, the important part of this is that he was close to not only Schumann, but really close to Mrs. Schumann, and Brahms, in fact, was in love with Mrs. Schumann. So it described the important event in her relationship. Now, there were some instances of secret marriages and marriages of people who weren't yet divorced, or people who married with unclear or questionable circumstances. And a nice example of this is Saddam Hussein. Natal Neptune equals Sun Moon, nice tight aspect. And he married his second wife without a divorce from his first wife. He married his second wife in secret. He allegedly married a third wife. That's a Neptunian word, when they allegedly. And he was rumored, that's another Neptune word, rumored to have married his fourth wife. Now, you'll notice here that the node was awfully close to the Sun Moon midpoint, and in about 3 or 4 more slides, we're going to be talking about that node on the Sun Moon midpoint because it's a triangulated relationship. Now, some people who secretly married did not have Neptune on the Sun Moon midpoint. They just had a big emphasized Neptune. So Pluto on the Sun Moon midpoint describes resources and a personal partnership. That can be a partner who's in finance, or a partner who inherits or has resources from another source other than a paycheck, or the resources have a positive or negative impact on the relationship. So in this instance, the man, FDR, President Roosevelt, tried to leave his marriage to marry someone else, and his mother threatened to disinherit him. So he had the natal midpoint picture, and transiting Pluto was conjunct the moon when it happened. He had the natal midpoint picture, which was not triggered off, but he had a Pluto transit to the moon describing the financial event with his mother. I am very big on, it's a major interpretation of Pluto to connect with resources. There is no planet in astrology that describes resources more than Pluto. It's other people's money, joint finance. It comes the closest to describing material circumstances, closer than any other planet. So George Washington, here we go with George Washington, and his wife was a widow who inherited a big fortune. When transiting Pluto was on the Sun Moon midpoint, there's a big arrow pointing to Pluto, a little far away from it, but there it is. And you see he was one of these people who had Sun equals Moon equals Pluto. So it really emphasized it. And so when the transit was 5 minutes orb, he wrote a letter to her lawyer saying, I'm her husband. I'm entitled to a third of that estate. And that happened when Pluto equals Sun Moon Midpoint. And we also could be talking about, during a transit or a solar return, the partner's inheritance. These are all the Plutonian situations. The partner's inheritance, settlement, investment, like a child support or alimony kind of settlement, an investment, pension, an alimony, child support, or an award, a lawsuit that awards money. And these are all typical issues when it appears in a solar return. These are people who had the minor aspects in their natal chart, a maid who married a Rockefeller. She also had the North Node in Scorpio, which says that you're going to get resources other than your paycheck. It's probably the most common meaning of the North Node in Scorpio is that you come into resources apart from the paycheck. South Node in Taurus, they don't get enough money from their job, or they choose to be compensated with alternative compensation, a company car or that kind of thing. Anyway, back to our Pluto equals Sun Moon, minor aspect, Marla Maples Trump. Now here's a different kind of financial situation where a couple was chosen to become a part of a community with an experimental economic model for property ownership and taxes. And that community still exists in New Jersey. Here are some events that happened to people with natal Pluto equals Sun Moon. So Louis XVI, who married Marie Antoinette, her spending got them into trouble. You could say, well, for example, when he had, what did he have? He had the transiting Pluto on his Sun Moon Midpoint, when riots broke out all over the country over the high prices of flour and bread. That led to the French Revolution. People began to blame her personally for the problems of France. France couldn't pay its debt because of her extravagant spending. And that is what happened. He had the natal picture, and that's what happened when the transit hit it off. Now, when the progression hit it off, she nominated a financial minister. So there we have it, two different manifestations of resources connected with the relationship. Now, we saw this a while ago with progressed Jupiter on the Sun Moon Midpoint, having to do with luck and maybe some travel after they won the lottery. But she had natal Pluto on the Sun Moon Midpoint. And so there you have it. She had Pluto on the Sun Moon Midpoint, and she won the lottery with her husband. Now we have one more planet to go. We're going to do Chiron here. So node equals Sun Moon is one of the handiest midpoint pictures to know about because it describes a relationship that includes somebody else. And so when you see this, for example, when a client or somebody comes to you and they have node equals Sun Moon and they've met they've met somebody who the other person has node equals Sun Moon in their chart, that other person is going to be a triangulator. And that really does that. Just a small bit of information can be huge to know. So there's no pattern as to who triangulates. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis had it in her chart. Her husband was a big womanizer. And Bill Clinton has the natal picture. So there you go. There's no rhyme or reason as to whether it's the triangulator, whether it's the person who's promiscuous or triangular. Let's not say they're necessarily promiscuous, but where they're not exclusive, or where it's the mate of the person. So here's an example of a composer. He had, as you can see, Pluto and the node equals the Sun Moon Midpoint. And what happened was that he received financial gifts from at least one girlfriend, while during all the time he had love affairs with others, natal, node, and Pluto on the Sun Moon Midpoint. That was Franz Liszt. So here's another, this is how it worked out when it appeared in solar returns. An affair that has been immortalized between Mrs. Hamilton and Admiral Nelson. When that affair began, his solar return had node equals Sun Moon. So for example, if Mrs. Nelson had come as a client and you saw that her husband had node equals Sun Moon in his solar return, you could tell Mrs. Nelson, your husband is triangulating this year. That is the value of seeing it. Well, it has more value in a solar return than that, but that is a huge, I find it to be a huge value in my work with solar returns and consulting with clients about the condition of their relationship. So here's an example of a poet who was married. He left his wife when he met Arthur Rimbaud. This is Verlaine and Rimbaud, also legendary relationship. So Verlaine had the midpoint picture. He had the natal midpoint picture, node equals Sun Moon, and it was in his solar return when he met Rimbaud, and the whole picture was Uranus equals node equals Sun Moon. When Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie connected, it was in Jennifer Aniston's solar return that contained node equals Sun Moon. So you could say to her, if she came to you as a client that year, or if she's a friend who you're just, kind of chatting about her chart, that relationship would be triangular. She could have gone out with somebody else, or her husband could have gone out with somebody else. There's no rhyme or reason to who this describes in the relationship. It could be the person whose chart it is, or it could describe their mate. Here we go. Here's the mate. It was in Brad Pitt's solar return when he was still married to Jennifer Aniston. Same picture. He was the triangulator. She was married to the triangulator. Here's a progression when George Washington had the progressed picture, 4 minutes of orb. The love of his life married someone else. Now here's an example of the event involving another couple. A couple you are close to, but you are not part of the couple. So Paul McCartney had the progressed picture, node equals Sun Moon, when John Lennon, Paul McCartney and John Lennon were close, when John Lennon met his future wife, who was engaged to somebody else. It's a very convoluted situation, but that's what happened to Paul McCartney when the progressed node was on his Sun Moon midpoint. It described a couple that he was not part of, but close to. And among children, node equals Sun Moon means that another couple is living with your parents. It doesn't mean the parents are triangulating. It means there's another couple involved in their space. So, for example, it'll have to do with describing grandparents or in-laws. Well, I guess in-laws would be grandparents to the kids. I think we're on our final slide. This is Chiron equals Sun Moon. The partner has physical or mental health issues. There is within the relationship alienation or disconnect from the partner, or harm can result from the relationship. It can even be that the two harm other people, the people involved in the relationship harm other people. Dysfunction arises from within the relationship, or it befalls the relationship. So this was the illustration of a child who was abducted, had 2 children with her abductor. She was born with Sun equals Moon equals Chiron. That's the strongest you can have when they're all in aspect. But when she was kidnapped, she had a Sun Moon aspect, but it was with her midheaven connecting with the Sun Moon midpoint. And that's an AA chart. So we trust the midheaven coming to Sun Moon. This woman was murdered by her boyfriend. Sid Vicious married Nancy Spungen, and she had Chiron equals Sun Moon in her natal chart. Prince Andrew has the natal picture. And we saw, I think, did we see this? maybe no, maybe this was the example. Prince Andrew has the natal picture, but what he had the progression when he was small, when he was 1 year old, actually, and his parents did not show up for his first birthday party. When Jay-Z had the transit, his wife released a record, an album that refers to his extramarital activity. And when an old sex tape of his and hers was found, transiting Chiron was on his Sun Moon Midpoint. This is another extraordinary story. I don't know why there's not a Broadway show about this. Maybe there has been sometime in the past. This is an extraordinary story about John Ruskin. So he had an unconsummated marriage, and his wife had it annulled, and it became a big public scandal. It was published in the newspaper, and everybody knew their business. She testified publicly that the reason for the annulment was that her private parts were displeasing to him. That's a nice way of putting it, actually, and it's sort of a quote, displeasing. And it implied that he was impotent. Anyway, he never had another relationship after that because she ended any hopes that he could have had with any other girl by warning the girl's parents about him. So he never had another relationship ever again in his life. His parents also had an interesting relationship. They stayed engaged for 10 years, and then they got married with, kind of a somber, no celebration. And then Ruskin was born, and he was their only child. Anyway, it's really much more about Ruskin's own relationship. And you see that's a 2-minute aspect, 2-minute orb of Chiron to the Sun Moon Midpoint. Thomas Mann had a very happy marriage to a woman who was a very good-spirited woman. And but in 5 years of her life, she was worn out. She was pregnant 4 times. She had 2 miscarriages. She ran her house. She was secretary for her husband. Secretary is probably not the right word because she was really his full-time, full-fledged assistant. Anyway, as a result of all that, she became ill. And there is, in many, many of his books, there's a reference to sanitariums. This is Thomas Mann. It's about their experience with her condition that remained misdiagnosed for the rest of their lives. And he had Mars equals Chiron equals Sun Moon. By the way, active assistant, Mars equals Sun Moon. That's another good secretarial duties, let's say the active assistant for her husband. And here is a painting of Chiron equals Sun Moon. This is a painting called The Lovers by Magritte, and I just love it because it's a beautiful pictorial illustration of alienation in a relationship. I want to thank you so much for watching Planets on the Sun Moon Midpoint. I'm Faith McInerney, and you can read about other midpoint pictures in my blog, Midpoint Observatory. And if you have any interest in contacting me, I'm at astrofaith@aol.com. Thanks again. Bye-bye.